Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is with great pride that I rise to support the motion for the approval of the budget estimates of the public sector for the financial year 2023. Mr. Speaker, this is the largest budget in Guyana's history, and under the leadership of His Excellency Dr. Mohamed Irfan Ali and the PPPC-led government. This budget will meet the immediate needs of our nation while securing the future of the Guyanese people. It cements the gaps to realizing a one Guyana. As such, this budget could not be presented under a more appropriate theme than improving lives today, building prosperity for tomorrow. Mr. Speaker, permit me the opportunity to congratulate the senior minister within the office of the President with responsibility for finance, Dr. Ashni Singh, and his team from the Ministry of Finance for the thorough work done leading to the successful presentation of the 2023 budget. Mr. Speaker, upon the return to office, the PPP civic government met a plethora of issues that affected our indigenous peoples. These range from an indiscriminate neglect and stagnant village economy, all the way to the pause of land tenure activities for our First People. The inclusive and progressive part of this government has sought to propel the rights of our Amerindian brothers and sisters to greater limits. This budget purports a transformative path which is emanated in the absence of new taxes while focusing on promoting incentives that seeks to enhance the lives of our Guyanese people in the most progressive way. It is against this background, Mr. Speaker, that the budgetary allocation to Amerindian and hinterland development will be presented. Mr. Speaker, the budget 2023 has allocated a capital allocation of $4.7 billion towards the continued development of livelihood of our Amerindians. This is in furtherance to other major allocations in the health sector, education sector, infrastructure, social services, which directly translates to the increased standard of living of our indigenous citizens in every region of our beautiful country. Mr. Speaker, I want to say that I need to respond to the previous speaker. Since the previous speaker, Mr. Speaker, only spoke about Region 7. Apparently, Mr. Speaker, in all the years that the Honorable Member Don Hastings served as a Member of Parliament representing Amerindians in this Parliament, she's never found the time to adequately, and I say adequately, visit any of the other regions to understand the challenges or the progress taking place there. And so in response to her diatribe on Region 7, I wish to say that in Region 7, more than $100 million were invested in 2022. Some 700 residents of Camarang in Region 7 are benefiting from a new $45 million water system funded by the PPP civic government. As a result, after more than 20 years, even when Honorable Don Hastings' government was in office, there was the constant complaint by the residents of Camarang about the poor supply of water. We have corrected that. The drilling of new wells in Jawala in Region 7 to the tune of $40 million will provide central Jawala with water, pure and safe water. Mr. Speaker, the completion of another water system in Kurutuku. Mr. Speaker, this investment is not only in the water sector, but it also extends, as I said a few paragraphs above in my delivery of my presentation, that education, health, infrastructure, social services, and attention to the village economies of the indigenous villages and the hinterland communities were all addressed during the period of the PPP civic government from 92 to 2015. From 2020 to current, we have a vested interest in ensuring that the hinterland and the Amerindian villages which populate the hinterland gets the benefit of the country's resources under our government. Remind me, Mr. Speaker, I wish to say that there was a presentation earlier in the week which accused the PPP civic government of providing contracts to only family and friends. Well, we are very happy that the Honorable MP Don Hastings' spouse is a friend of ours, and so he continues to receive contracts under our government. Mr. Speaker, as a reminder, under the APNU AFC-led government, during the period of 2015 to 2020, the land tenure for Amerindians was simply not a priority. And I repeat that the land tenure for Amerindians were simply not a priority. Mr. Speaker, upon our resumption of office, the PPP civic government has reaffirmed its commitment towards ensuring the fulfillment of our manifesto commitment and our governmental obligation to ensure that we complete the land tenure project, which will benefit numerous Amerindian villages when it's concluded. Yesterday, Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Vincent Henry presentation attempted to demonstrate effective government by the APNU AFC. He chose a very poor example while trying to assume credit for titling and demarcation. And he listed a number of communities. He listed Mainstay, Mashabo, Kapui, Yupukari, but he lacked understanding of the process of land titling. Setting the record straight, Mr. Speaker, Mainstay, Mashabo, Kapui, and Yupukari were titled since in the 90s. So there was no need for the APNU AFC government to title them again. I suppose the honorable member was referring to the extension which they had applied for. I want to lay the facts. And what are the facts? It's the PPP civic government which committed $10.6 million from the Guyana Agreement with the Kingdom of Norway, made possible through the LCDS. It was the PPP civic government which established the Amerindian Land Titling Unit during our tenure to execute the land titling project for lands for Amerindians. Mr. Speaker, the misinformation shared in this House yesterday, it was the MOAA, or the Ministry of Amerindian Affairs, which commenced processing the application for land extension for Mainstay, Mashabo, Kapui, and Yupakari. And only early last year, Mr. Speaker, myself, Minister Zulfi, Minister Vikram, we all visited Kapui, Mashabo. We had a review of the investigative report, which we left when we left in 2015. And it was only recently they received their extension, and they're up on the list for demarcation. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, the honorable member actually forgot that there was a no confidence motion presented in the Parliament. And that no confidence motion, Mr. Speaker, will not be used or will never be used to justify why they did not title Amerindian lands when they were there. They failed to process application for Rockstone and Parabara. And this year, before the first quarter, again, a number of ministers will travel to those areas to revisit the old investigative report, which the PPP Civic finished in May. In fact, the ALT team was active in May while election was going on, the campaign, including the election. And we will revisit that old investigative report, which the APNU AFC failed to act on, and we will see that the recommendations or the findings will bring a conclusion to both Parabara and Rockstone. Mr. Speaker, in addition to that, yesterday, the Honorable Dr. Ashni Singh, the Senior Minister in the Office of the President with responsibility for finance, was chastised for mentioning at some point in time that no lands were awarded during the APNU AFC period in government. However, Mr. Speaker, please permit me to quote from Newsroom article of May 30th, 2018, entitled, "I have not been able to title any village, Mr. Alicock, Minister Alicock." And I quote, Minister of IPA, and that's Indigenous Peoples Affairs, Sidney Alicock, has admitted that in 3 years, his ministry has not issued any title to Amerindian communities. And this is in 2018. Quoting again, speaking to reporters, Minister Alicock expressed, and I quote, "I have not been able to title any village because," and he was speaking like a sweet boy, "because we want to do things that are truly reflected in the free, prior, and informed process." The Amerindian land titling project was slated to end in 2016, and I'm still quoting from the article. But since the ministry made no progress, they were granted an extension of 2 years. However, and he's speaking again, he's speaking to the press, and I'm quoting, "However, little progress has been made since then, and the new deadline is now October 2018. Further quoting, Minister Alicock said he will be making a request for another extension by writing to the Ministry of the Presidency, shame on you, which will then communicate with representatives in Norway.
Shame on you. Shame on you.
The Honorable Mr. Vincent Henry and the APNU AFC has no moral standing to speak about effective government, nor taking credit for land extensions to Amerindian villages. They failed the Amerindian miserably. Mr. Speaker, I want to assure this Honorable House that the PPP civic government will continue to support the Amerindian land titling project. Just under 2 years, the MOAA demarcated 7 villages and issued 5 COT, Certificate of Titles to Villages. In addition to this, the ministry has completed revision of 23 investigative reports to date, and we will act on them. We will not sit down for 5 years and watch them on the shelves. The government will further support the ALT program through the allocation of 500 million to advance Amerindian land titling activities to further safeguard and improve the security of land tenure enjoyed by Amerindian peoples. And as such, Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Amerindian Affairs will be pursuing 19 demarcation and 11 land extension in 2023, far more than 0, which the APNU, AFC government performed or delivered to the Amerindians.
Shame on you.
Shame. Shame on you. Mr. Speaker, furthermore, I heard ramblings about a court case. Mr. Speaker, I want to set the record straight that from 1966 to 1992, the PNC was in office. They did nothing to title Amerindian lands for the first people of our country. From 1995 to 2020, the current minister then, confirmed to the press and the public and to the committee, the parliamentary committee, that there was 0 titling for Amerindian during his period. Mr. Speaker, the APNU AFC broken record that the CSO were dismissed by the PPP civic government is an old argument in an attempt to clear their conscience. It was the APNU AFC government which dismissed the young Amerindians. So no amount of justification will erase the hurt they inflicted on Amerindian youths. The APNU AFC paid the price for this wrong on the young people in the election of 2020, and I say no more. The government of Guyana remains committed to youth empowerment and development with nationwide initiatives such as the Gold Scholarship. Today, youths have a plethora of opportunities at their fingertips for academic growth. This is being complemented by the ongoing efforts of the PPP civic government to bridge the digital gap between the hinterland and the coast through the government reinstated ICT access and e-services for hinterland, poor and remote communities project under the ambit of the Prime Minister's office. I heard in this house just now that more than 100 ICT hubs were installed under the APNU AFC government. Mr. Speaker, every village you go to, even the Honorable Cox complained about it, that there is weak, poor, and non-existent internet service. It is limiting to the young people of the hinterland to access comfortably, adequately, the opportunities that abound. However, Mr. Speaker, they didn't tell the whole story because those who are now working in the reinstated project or the ICT Hub project has discovered that all the equipment, the laptops, the batteries and accessories were stored in a bond in diamond for 5 years without being touched, denying the Amerindians of connectivity
Excellent.
and internet connectivity and computer literacy.
Graceful. Tell them.
That was absolutely disgraceful, shameful. And you talk about effective government. What is effective about that?
Honorable Minister, you have to take out shameful. Disgraceful, shameful can't work.
As of 2020, 90 hubs have been completed and 75 have been fully equipped and functional. Mr. Speaker, this is what you call effective government. In less than 2 years, we're up and about doing what a responsible government should be doing. This year, 500 million has been allocated in budget 2023 for the construction or the continued construction of internet facilities and equipping those hubs. In 2015, when the PPP Civic left office, may I remind the honorable members on the other side that there were 1,972 CSO officers who were dismissed. Mr. Speaker, what did that mean to the Amerindians? It meant annually that they were deprived of $700 million from their pockets. Over the 5 years of the APNU AFC government, they denied those young Amerindians $3.6 billion. This is grievously disappointing. Tell me you like and care for Amerindians? Mr. Speaker, they will forever have to live with that on their conscience. On assuming office, we address the matter and we address the manifesto promises to the young people of the hinterland. And we have reinstated that project. Today, we have 2,500 young people fully engaged again, receiving an income so that they can assist to put food on their tables, whether it's for themselves or their extended families. Mr. Speaker, Amerindian youths were trained in computer literacy. These youths have returned to their respective villages in anticipation to manage and support the ICT project being executed by the Office of the Prime Minister. Further, 160 young Amerindians were trained in solar installation and maintenance and have also returned to be prepared for when the household solar unit project gets underway. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Housing and Water has invested more than $2 billion in water system in the hinterland. And in 2023, $1.4 billion has been allocated. And in anticipation of that, the Ministry of Amerindian Affairs and the Ministry of Housing and Water has already signed earlier an MOU where 466 young people will be trained to operate and manage those systems. Further, Mr. Speaker, 720 Amerindian youths were trained in several other areas. Maintenance, and I'll just list a few. Maintenance of small engines, 125. Mr. Speaker, training in computer literacy, 151. Training in garment construction, 129. What a small number, but you have to look at the big picture. Goal has trained, in addition to more than about 2,000 young Amerindians under their program. BIP has trained, and the numbers were shared in this house on the first day when the minister spoke about the program and the training in the hinterland. Scholarships are being awarded to Amerindian students at the university and at the secondary level. Mr. Speaker, it is not about the numbers. This is the initiative and the projects that are conducted by a single sector, the Ministry of Amerindian Affairs. Mr. Speaker, let's now turn ourselves to some other matters. The APNU AFC speaks about reckless spending and mismanagement of funds. And in fact, I heard yesterday that the Ministry of Amerindian Affairs in 2015 could not account for $1.2 million. Mr. Speaker, I want to draw your attention to their legacy of unaccountability. In 2016, the AG report, page 108, provides details of spending an amount of $1.3 billion, for which no progress report was presented for audit. And in the paragraph of that same report, 235 paragraph states, the AG report could not determine whether the funds were utilized for the intended purposes. No accountability. No. Mr. Speaker, the following year, in 2017, the Stabroek News reported on the Auditor General finding of lack of accountability for over 1.5 spent by the Indigenous Peoples Affairs Ministry. The Guyana Times headline screamed, Indigenous Peoples Affairs Ministry cannot account for 865 million AG. On checking the AG report for verification, the report of 2017 at paragraph 282, it is once more again validated, and I quote, it could not be determined whether the funds were utilized for the intended purposes. Mr. Speaker, and this is the legacy for the 5 years, no accountability. And that is why when we were not in office, but we traveled extensively as MPs, every community spoke about neglect, no transportation, no support for school children, no gasoline for the Reverend school children, nothing. Mr. Speaker, this is clearly gross accountability by the APNU AFC government and their operatives in the then Ministry of Indigenous Peoples Affairs. Economic development with local village economies remain a priority for the PPP civic government. We will continue to provide the resources to transform and develop village economies, for them to prosper economically and to bridge the gap, which challenges our government as well as the local beneficiaries in maintaining and sustaining livelihood activities in an inclusive and transparent manner, contributing to the transformation of the hinterland communities and Amerindian villages. In 2023, the ADF, or the Amerindian Development Fund, has been allocated $2.7 billion to cater for further support investment for training in tourism and hospitality, business development plans, etc. This is laying the foundation for some of the economic projects and activities that will flourish over the period ahead. Yesterday, we also heard another member stomping his chest about land being allocated to construct the NTC Secretariat. Mr. Speaker, I want to draw your attention to a headline in Guyana Times, July 21st, 2018. Government reneges and promised NTC headquarters land. After issuing a 50-year lease, Mr. Speaker, they canceled it. They canceled it. Mr. Speaker, the National Tushao Council, and I quote, Mr. Speaker, I have all the articles here ready to hand over to the Speaker, well enveloped, and I quote, Mr. Speaker, the National Tushao Council will have to wait somewhat longer for a plot of land to construct a secretariat complex. After government on Thursday announced it has scrapped plans to issue a plot of land as Sophia, end of quote. Mr. Speaker, It was only after a rigorous representation by the then executive of the NTC that forced the identification of another plot of land in Sophia in the vicinity of the Amerindian Heritage Village located in the compound of the National Exhibition Center was really provided after a rigorous representation. Mr. Speaker, so when the honorable members want to beat their chests about the APNU AFC providing land for NTC Secretariat, the full story must be told, since it is my understanding that the lease for the initial plot of land was cancelled and disposed by sale to their friends so that they can retain it, their friends and cronies.
Tell us about the bill. Tell us about the bill.
It is the PPP civic government which has made it possible for the beautifully designed NTC Secretariat, which was described yesterday, which include offices, conference halls, and accommodation facilities. The construction is currently in progress and is slated to be completed by the first quarter of 2023. This year's budget provides an allocation of $70 million, which includes $20 million for furnishing. The total sum allocation for the full completion of this secretariat is $127 million for the building and $20 million for the functioning, a total of $147 million. Nothing was granted in your time towards the NTC. When the NTC conference is to be held this year, the Indigenous leaders will be able to utilize this secretariat. This year, an allocation of $91 million is allocated for the hosting of that meeting. Mr. Speaker, there were talks about how the conference last year was influenced by the government, by the minister, and the leaders were held hostage. Mr. Speaker, I want to remind you that the last NTC meeting, which was held by the APNU AFC government, my colleague on the other side, the deputy speaker of this house, had to protest and even wrote an article saying that we are not the girlfriends of the minister, so don't come visit us in the evenings, because the ministers paid no attention to the issues, the challenges, the concerns of the leaders who came to the city to represent their people. Remember that? Remember the NTC writing a letter to the leader of the opposition asking for the former minister, Keith Scott, he's not here with us, but a letter was sent to the leader of the then government asking for an apology. In fact, a member sitting right here decided that there's not going to be any apology. We have done nothing and said nothing wrong, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, their memories are short, but I will proceed. Mr. Speaker, I wish to point out also that the NTC has endorsed this budget. Mr. Speaker, and I want to quote, and I have here also the NTC endorsement press release. This budget, and I quote, this budget, the largest in Guyana history, shows the government's commitment to the continued upliftment and improvement of the lives of all Guyanese, especially the first people, the NTC said. All of these interventions, and I quote, Mr. Speaker, all of these interventions and more show the government's commitment to fulfilling its manifesto promises, while at the same time bridging the gap between the coast and hinterland.
Honorable Minister, your time has expired by 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My honorable colleague, I'd love to give her another hour to speak, but I leave it up to you to decide the time for my colleague to let her conclude her presentation. It is time that history is corrected.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister Teixeira. Thanks to my assistant timekeepers for reminding me about time. Honorable Minister, you may continue to conclude in 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, may I remind this House also that there's an endorsement by the NTC for the expanded LCDS 2030. Mr. Speaker, and I quote from that resolution, which was passed by the NTC, and I quote by reading, 1, recognizing that the central tenets of the LCDS 2030, like the LCDS 2009, involves community benefiting from the revenues earned from all sale of forest carbon services, where the LCDS 2030 sets out new opportunities for new revenues. 2, agrees with Guyana's national approach of engaging with forest carbon financing and is aimed at bringing benefits to Guyanese and particularly indigenous villages and communities. 3, the NTC recognized that the extensive national scale and community-based consultation conducted over the past 7 months have informed the main aspects of the LCDS 2030, recognizing the commitment to FPIC in Guyana's LCDS 2030, bringing to rest the criticism that is repetitive on the other side about consultation and FPIC. There you have the legally constituted body of the leaders of the Amerindians endorsing the LCDS and also the sale of carbon credits. Mr. Speaker, in addition to all the direct and usual programs of the ministry, I must say that out of the LCDS 2030, 15% of all revenue received from the sale of carbon credits is going towards projects for village sustainability, currently being undertaken by the villages. Mr. Speaker, the Amerindian Act, $80 million is allocated this year to directly consult with the Amerindian villages and their people. Mr. Speaker, training. I heard the request for training. Over the period of the APNU 5-year, there was no training. Training was resumed in 2021, 2022, and again, another sum has been provided in this current budget for training of Tushaus. Mr. Speaker, women, culture, and language revival. These are important to the lives and the identity of the indigenous people. Mr. Speaker, $205 million will be allocated to address women, culture, and language revival. Mr. Speaker, I would wish to go on and on. However, I want to also say that our government provided more than 200 tractors to address food security improvements, to expand cultivation in the hinterland and Amerindian communities, and to contribute to the national drive to making Guyana food secure and the food basket for the region. Mr. Speaker, they talk about transportation for school children. Long before they came into office in 2015 to 2020, our government provided 38 minibuses in the hinterland. When we came back into office, we have already been providing transportation, both land and water, to the school children. Mr. Speaker, even leaders who were denied ATV to traverse to do administrative work and to use it as a tool to move about in the region was denied. And I am proud and with pride to say that every village in Region 8 in the North Pacorimas now have ATVs. Even Wiper, one of the farthest village, has a Land Cruiser to transport the few secondary school students who has to go to the Paramakatai Secondary School. Mr. Speaker, I know my time is up, and I would love to have had 2 hours to share with this House the achievements of my government and the projected and expected achievements for the year and the rest of the term and beyond. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I endorse this budget for approval.